Troublemakers, Parts 19, 20, and 21. The False Uprising. Monarch Devan waved down at the horde of rabid followers, a wide smile on his face as he soaked in the praise. The glory of being king washing over him in a wave. Reaching into a pouch at his thick waist belt, Monarch Devan drew a handful of coins and threw them out over the crowd. Hearing as their cheers rose to a fever pitch, the monarch closed his eyes, spreading his arms wide. The coins clattered to the ground in a sudden, deafening silence. Devan opened his eyes, gazing down at the now mist-filled, empty castle courtyard. The soft sounds of distant screams and gunfire reached his ears. Then he saw it. It stood alone in the middle of the courtyard, black smoke rising from its shadow-black body. It was crouched down as though wounded, its form shifting and twisting like it wasn't truly there. Slowly it raised its head, eyes black circles rimmed with white that bored into Devan's soul. The word was long, drawn out and so haunting that it made Devan take a step back. "You can't let us!" The figure stood, and in a blink it was standing before the monarch, making him stumble backwards and fall as he looked up at the demonic entity. A chorus of screaming voices rose from its body. "Now, you die!" The monarch scrambled to his feet, heart pounding like a kettle drum as he sprinted back into the castle. He slammed the castle's heavy wooden doors behind him, only to hear them explode open. The screaming entity was hot on his tail, the smell of mold and rot coming off of it in stifling waves as more and more screams joined the chorus. Devan screamed for his guards, watching as they popped up around him only to be eviscerated into bloody chunks. Legs burning, chest heaving, the monarch desperately tried to outrun the vengeful spirit chasing him. But he tripped over the loose hem of his royal robe. He cried out in fear for mercy as he swung his fists in a desperate bid to save himself. The specter caught his arms before slowly, almost tenderly, leaning in. The monarch fell silent, hoping for mercy, but he got none as the vengeful spirit ripped his throat out with its teeth. The monarch awoke, screaming and tearing at his sheets. In a panic, Devan bolted out of bed and burst out of his bedchamber's door, falling into a surprised royal guard's arms as he screamed and spat. "They're gonna kill me! Save me! Save me!" The royal guard set the now near catatonic monarch against the wall and checked the dark bedchamber with a helmet-mounted floodlight. Finding nothing, the guard returned to the hallway and tried to calm his emperor-king down. But Devan was having none of it as he stared at the mob of maimed and disfigured humans that stared at him from the room. One, naught but a skeleton in a dark and ragged cloak, stood and stared blankly at him from the doorway, before lifting an hourglass with very little sand left in the top. Devan blinked and they were gone, however. The tyrant monarch would not be going back to sleep. "Get me my royal advisor. Now!" The monarch muttered, wiping the condensation from his face scales. The royal guard didn't move, seemingly torn between guarding his emperor and following direct orders. This drew the emperor's already boiling anger. "I said now, don't make me feed you to the experiment!" The royal guard went running as Emperor Devan desperately tried to calm himself. The image of the near-empty hourglass stuck in his head. On the other end of town, in an abandoned bunker, a boy peeled his eyes open. Hearing the gurgling of his new roommate's fish tank, he let out a sigh of relief. "That was a weird dream," Drake muttered. He could still taste the metallic flavor of the monarch's blood in his mouth. Drake watched as Jimbo swam up to his floating log. The fighting fish rested his long fabric-like fins as he took a gulp of air from the surface. Renton had called the fish a betta and kept him in a 10-gallon tank stuffed with plants. Small, bright red shrimp cleaned the bottom of the tank like it was a religious obligation. Drake found the entire thing relaxing, just watching as the small aquatic animals did their thing without a worry in the world. A smile came to Drake's lips as he watched Jimbo flare his gills at a shrimp that had swam into his log, the shrimp swimming backwards frantically in fright. However, Drake's moment of peace couldn't last forever. The hydraulic door hissed open, making Drake look away from Jimbo's tank as Renton leaned into the room wide-eyed. "You have to see this." The seriousness in the Gecnosian's voice spooked Drake. Without a word, Drake stood and gestured for Renton to lead. Making their way back up to the common area, Renton began to explain. So apparently that big-ass bomb you set off knocked out an electrical substation that powered the largest market in Golgotha. I don't know why an entire substation was dedicated to a single market, but anyway, something huge has happened. The door to the common area whooshed open as they walked towards it. Drake froze in the doorway. The holotable was set to the largest view screen it had, and everyone was looking at it in utter shock and awe. Humans, honest to God, humans were taking over the streets. Hundreds, no, thousands were fighting tooth and nail against Gechnosian soldiers. Many had even acquired heavy Gauss weaponry and were using it to astonishing effect. Barricades were reduced to holy metal and leaking sandbags as soup can-sized metallic slugs ripped through them. Gechnosian soldiers lay downed by the hundreds, but more kept showing up. However, one thing caught Drake's eye, something he'd never expected. Every single human had a thick black line stretching from their left eyebrow, across the nose, and to the right side of their jaw. Drake reached up to his own face, feeling the raised line of scar tissue that ran across his face. He'd gotten it during his fight with Garavan in the arena when he'd been promised freedom if he won. The scar he'd earned in a desperate bid to earn his and his village's freedom had become a symbol. How, he couldn't tell. But staring at that screen, he felt something rising in his chest, something he hadn't felt since he'd stabbed Garavan in the heart. He felt hope. Hope that his people would finally be freed from their chains after so long. A soft scream began to rise in his ears as he clapped his hands together, startling everyone into looking at him. "Listen up! We're not going to get a chance like this again. I don't know how long they can hold out, but we need to get the mule loaded with as much guns and ammunition as she can carry and get over there. Somehow, they know who I am, and that we started this fight, and I'll go to hell before I stand around and do nothing. Everybody understand? All right? Let's fucking go!" The room buzzed with energy as everyone from Kaz's littlest boy to Harl and Renton got to work. Drake didn't hesitate as he picked up a crate of rifles still warm from the synthesizer and booked it towards the garage where they'd stored the hover transport. The hover transport rocketed through the now empty streets of Golgotha. Drake did his best to stay on his feet as they swung around a corner, hover drives humming loudly in protest. Drake glanced at the others as they double and triple checked their weapons. They should be arriving any second now if Renton was correct. "There's a barricade up ahead. What do I do?" Renton panikedly asked through the open cab door. "Just ram it! Go, go, go!" "You got it!" The hovercraft juddered and shook as it hit something heavy. Then everything went wrong. Drake felt weightless all of a sudden as the hover drives just shut down with no input. Drake was thrown to the floor with the others as the hover transport came to an abrupt stop and flipped. Thankfully, they were secured well, because none of the weapons crates fell on them. But Drake could feel where he'd slammed his head into one on the way down. The doors flew open, and before any of them could get to a weapon, they were mercilessly dragged from the back of the transport. Somebody bound his hands while he was blinded by the sunlight before they kicked him in the back of the knees to make him kneel. Kaz was shunted down on his left, Cassius to his right, Destrier and Remen next to them. A haughty voice giggled derisively at them. "Oh my, you parasites really are stupid enough to fall for it." Drake blinked up at the voice as his eyes finally adjusted to the light. A Gechnosian in regal golden robes stood over them, the pearly white power armor of the king's personal guard flanking him on either side. Drake felt his heart drop as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. "It wasn't a real uprising," he said in disbelief. "Bingo!" The Emperor's advisor teased, reaching into his wide sleeves and producing a human-made revolver before continuing. "You see, originally we were going to use video editing software, but then I had this wonderful idea. Want to know what it was?" Drake was speechless, his mind going over every possibility. But there was only one he could think of. "No." The king's advisor grinned cruelly, spread his arms, and stepped to the side, revealing a street full of disarmed, bound, and kneeling humans, perhaps 100 of them. The Emperor's advisor cackled as he stepped up to a bound teenager, their eyes filled with despair. "You see, I bought some troublesome parasites and had them stage a fight. I even told them if they fought well, they could be free. Then I just doctored the footage a little, and voila, a perfectly real-looking uprising to bait in Golgotha's Troublemakers. They ate it up, fought hard enough to get you worried for them. And now? Now they get their freedom. The bound teenager looked up hopefully, but the advisor simply placed the revolver's muzzle between their eyes and with a cold mockery of a sympathetic face, pulled the trigger. The advisor laughed coldly as the teen's life, memories, dreams, and goals were painted onto the pavement. Looking at Drake, the advisor chuckled. This is the only freedom your kind will get. All Drake could hear was the screaming in his ears, rising to a fever pitch as the boy's lifeless body fell to the ground. The teen's corpse slumped to the ground, the screaming in Drake's ears reaching a fever pitch. No! The young dead human's head rolled back, glazed eyes boring into Drake's, empty, bloodshot eyes with a hole between them. No. Drake struggled against his bindings, the metallic cable digging into his forearms. The advisor laughed, pressing the revolver's muzzle against a catatonic woman's temple. No! Drake cried out, fighting against his bonds, tearing his forearms open against the rough cable. Black smoke began to rise from the wounds, dark veins crawling upwards from the torn flesh as the advisor thumbed the hammer back. The advisor paused as he noticed the smoke. Stop that! The advisor barked, pulling the revolver's muzzle away from the woman's head. No! Drake bellowed, even as the revolver was pressed against his own head. The advisor's finger began to squeeze the trigger, voice going up an octave as he witnessed the black veins crawling up Drake's throat. I said stop that. I won't let you kill! Blam! The advisor flinched backwards as the human boy's head whipped back, black blood spattering the ground behind them. The advisor's breathing was ragged, blood flushed with fear hormones as he stared at the still kneeling body, a scream frozen in its lips. He turned, dropping the revolver on the ground, feeling it was cursed. Kill the rest, he ordered, marching towards his personal hovercraft. Drake stared at the sky, the screaming of tortured souls pounding throughout his body. He wasn't dead yet. He had a job to do, one he couldn't abandon. Something was happening to him. His skin crawled like it was infested with ants. His muscles burned like they were set alight. Something was fixing the damage to his brain. It hurt, like a blunt knife scraping the inside of his skull. A hooded skull appeared over him, its jaw opening wide as a voice like nails on a chalkboard filled the street. An image of a broken chain flashed before Drake's eyes before he was swallowed by a comfortable darkness. Be reborn. The monarch's advisor was knocked to the ground by a blast of cold, cold energy. Quickly rolling onto his back, he gazed in horror at the scene before him. The parasite boy he'd killed was floating in the air, his own companions knocked away and fearful as thick black smoke encased him in a cocoon. An odd mist clouded the air, making it reek of rot and gun smoke while obscuring the advisor's vision. Crawling to his feet, the advisor turned, trying to sneak for his hovercraft. Leaving so soon,